on a rainy night in New Haven, Connecticut, at a no-name gas station in 2016. I met a guy from Craigslist who sold me an aperture monitor for 80 bucks. You get what you pay for. This story is one of the inspirations for this series. At the time, I had been filmmaking for a few years, and it was time to invest in a monitor. I know which monitor I really wanted, but I didn't think I could afford it. So I scoured Craigslist and I found an $80 aperture monitor that had fungus in the panel, it wasn't bright enough to use outdoors, and it never had a shot at satisfying my needs. I continued to use it and another suboptimal monitor that I eventually bought until the SmallHD Focus came out. Since then, I've bought, owned, and sold a handful of wonderful SmallHD monitors, and they've been a vital part of my operating over the years. I remember when I realized how important it was to monitor a glorious, larger than my little rear LCD screen image was. It really took my work to the next level. I was immersed in my images more than ever. Today I have a lot of SmallHD monitors. I have the Cine 24 you can see behind me, multiple Cine 7s. Some of them have built-in Teradeks so they can connect to each other. I have a 703 Bolt wireless director's monitor, and the Focus 5, right here. I think we all know by now that the industry trusts SmallHD. To keep this video short and straight to the point, I'll just tell you that I trust these monitors. I know that what they're showing me is exactly what I'm capturing, and their tools help me nail my exposures, monitor audio, and display different looks to a client. I think it would be best to take the rest of this time to walk you through how I set up my SmallHD monitors and what tools I use. I think the first thing that I tell people that's really important is to understand how bright your monitor is and set your backlight, which is the setting that we have here. Generally speaking, for indoor use or low light use, I like to leave this at 40. And then when we go outdoors, I'll put it to 60, 80, or 100. But if you have this indoors at 100%, it may skew your exposures. You may think you're bright enough, but you're not, just because you've got 1, 2, or 3,000 nits, blasting in the face. So again, for indoor use, I leave this at 40, 45, and for outdoors, I go all the way up to 100. For my tools, the first thing I'll do is exposure assistance, which is also known as false color. And the style that I personally choose is Spectrum. And I choose to not ignore the look. I choose to show the IRE guide. I might place the IRE guide right in the center. That's it. So if you don't know about false color basically gives us color representation based on the IRE value of the exposure of the image. This really helps dial in exposures for everything, but especially skin tones. I'm using it for skin tones all the time, making sure things fall between 50, 60, 65, depending on the skin tone. The next thing I'll do is LUT, which is one of the most important tools for my workflow. So I have an SD card in the monitor. I'll upload a LUT here. And now we're looking at that LUT. And if you remember, I chose to not ignore the look. So when this exposure assistant, this false color comes up, it's metering my LUT, which is my finished product. And then I'll monitor my exposure from there. Sure, I can turn that off and I can monitor the log exposure, but for the most part, I'm monitoring a finished exposure. Speaking of exposure, let's pull up a waveform so we can get a little bit more granular. We're not going to ignore the look. I will set this up a little bit differently than default. I kind of like to put it, depending on what we're shooting and how I'm shooting, I'll put this in the corner like that. And I can also bring the opacity down so it can just sort of live there. And if you don't know what a waveform is, it's basically 0 is black, 100 is white. Anything under 0 is generally peaking. Everything over 100 is generally peaking. And this gives me a visual representation of my exposure, something I've learned to read instantly, very quickly, and know what's good, what's bad, where's a good skin tone, when is a skin tone too bright or too dark, and sort of most importantly, when I'm clipping highlights. As you can see here, this is an extremely dark exposure. What's also really sweet about this waveform tool on SmallHD specifically is you have this thing called spot meter, which if you enable it, it brings up this box and you can literally put that box on someone's face or something. And as you can see, we've got some red now in the waveform indicating where this box is. So you can really dial your exposures in. That's not something I use all the time, but when exposures are absolutely critical, usually in some sort of talking head situation will I pull that out. Aspect ratio bars are things that I've pulled up. I've made a video about how to monitor anamorphic footage properly with a combination of the anamorphic tool here, the crop and scale tool here, and the aspect ratio tool here. So those are things that are incredibly important. I like a middle crosshair. I really enjoy that. That helps me a lot. If I wanted sort of rule of thirds crosshatch, I could do that, but I've in recent years tended not to want that. These SmallHD monitors now have a new level tool, which is incredible. Right on top here you can see. I'll have aspect ratio bars, you know, if we want to do 239, we can change it from matte to line. We can change the line color to white if we needed to or wanted to. I generally like matte black at somewhere in the 50 plus range. Like I said, I use anamorphic and crop all the time. Crop's really important, or not important, but just useful because sometimes with different cameras, the displays are different, like on Sony A7. For instance, a lot of people complain about the tools that take up all the space. You know, you could come in, crop the tools out, and then turn that on and off and toggle that, which is really important. So I might as well add my anamorphic because those three, remember in my anamorphic video, these three in conjunction are so important. And then finally, I'll do the audio meters. This is really something that's helped me in recent years upgrade my camera's internal audio meters. And what I mean by that is, you know, on a camera, DSLR, mirrorless, whatever, your audio meters are only so good on the screen. But these SmallHD ones that receive audio from SDI or HDMI are much better. This is channel 1 and channel 2, and I can actually see with color correspondence, my audio meters are peaking right where they need to be. Image capture is cool. An image overlay, basically, you can capture an image. You can just take a screenshot pretty much of what you have on your monitor, and then image overlay allows you to overlay that at opacity. Number one, that's just cool, and number two, it's useful if you want to match frames. It'll help you do that perfectly. I think the last thing to mention is that a lot of these monitors nowadays have camera control. This one has camera control for Sony Venice, and I know there's camera control for Red, DSMC 2 and DSMC 3, and Alexa and Amira. And it works really well. It's incredibly responsive. It's really great to have all of these settings literally at my fingertips. So that's it. I've been loving on my SmallHD ever since I bought that first Focus. I wanted to share my experience, show you how I set up my monitors, and most importantly, help you make the right decision. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.